Ideolectics. What is it? Ideolectics. What is ideolectics? The battle for the culture, which is the group behavior of a nationality. The battle for the group behavior, that is the culture of a nationality, is the battle for the governing system, the mental control system of that nationality, which is that nationality's language. So in order to manipulate a population into behaving in a certain manner, into conforming to a certain ideology, to a certain Weltanschauung, a world outlook, you have to control the language of that people, of that culture. And how do you control the language? You control the language ideolectically. You control the language ideolectically. The ideology imposes itself into the language in a vector that is dialectic. Dialectic, a manner of speaking, a certain mode of phrasing and describing reality, a group of terms, a terminological mode of speaking, comes from the mode of thinking, the ideology, the idea. The ideology encodes itself into a dialect, creating an ideolect. The ideolect then enters the battlefield that is the language, and fights for living space and resources and influence on the battlefield that is the language. And so every ideology and every world outlook has an ideolect through which it imposes itself onto the battlefield that is the language, and consequently into the minds of the people, of the nation, of the culture, hence manipulating and forming the behavior of a targeted group of the culture, of the people. And so if you look throughout history, every ideology and every religion has an ideolect. Like Christianity has an ideological way of speaking, an ideolect. Islam has an ideolect. Capitalism has an ideolect. Marxism has an ideolect. Fascism has an ideolect. You look in the 20th century when liberalism and Marxism and fascism, they had three distinct ideolects battling in the language for dominion over the minds of the masses, over the culture, over the behavior, over the world outlook of the population. And as now we can see in our languages, due to the influx of Islamic mass immigration, Islamic terminology, which comes from the Islamic ideolect, is starting to encroach on our languages. It's starting to embed itself into our languages, which brings us to the contemporarily predominant ideolect of Western civilization is the ideolect of globalism. Globalism. The belief that humanity is one and that there should be a one world set of values controlled by a one world governing system, a one world government. So the ideolect of globalism cannot tolerate the existence of any competing ideolects, because globalism is the ultimate imperialism. Globalism is total imperialism. There cannot be any place on earth left to its own devices, because that would be discriminatory, that would be exclusionary, it would be nationalistic, nationistic, racist. And so the ideolect of globalism is essentially ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Staat, right? Diversity macht frei. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Staat. Diversity macht frei. Globally. Everywhere. It's a global nation side. A global culture side. So opposition to the ideolect of globalism is in the globalist terminology defined as hate speech. So the beginning of resistance to tyranny is to question the ideology. And to question the ideology, you have to question the terminology, which means you have to question the ideological dialect, thus the ideolect. The ideolect of globalism has to be questioned and delegitimized in order for localism, local peoples, cultures, and local traditions, languages, nationalities to emancipate themselves from globalist slavery. The ideolect of globalism has to be questioned. What is the ideolect of globalism? You know, in order to enslave the nations, the globalist imperialist use the word racist. Racist in the globalist ideolect means particularist. sovereignist, autonomist, nationist. A person or an individual who believes in his or her nation or culture is a nationist. And so that is when the globalist ideolect attacks with the word racist. The word racist was used at the turn of the 19th to 20th century against the American Red Indians. The American Empire faced some opposition in the Native American Indian nations, and so they deployed the word racist. What if you don't want to be subsumed into the American Empire, if you don't want your people and culture to be erased in the name of diversity, then you are a racist. Same thing happened in the Soviet Union when disparate Slavic nations resisted the Bolshevik communist takeover of Marxist imperialism, Bolshevik imperialism. They were described by Leon Trotsky as Slavophile